don't know if John and Marion Mather are here. John and Marion Mather were actually married in the context of a worship service 50-some years ago. It was the first time I'd ever heard of it, and they spoke about it an awful lot as to be so meaningful that they were married in the context of their church family on a Sunday morning in Alaska. So that was ultimately one of the ways I ended up suggesting that to John and Linda as we dialogued. But we'll get to that in a couple minutes. A couple of years ago, there was an amazing movie out called The Imitation Game. And it was a true story how during World War II, England brought some of its most brilliant mathematicians to Bletchley Park, put them in a room, and set a machine in front of them called the Enigma machine. And it was invented by the Germans to protect their military communications. It was a tool in which they used to convey to the frontline troops where they were to go. And it was almost impossible to break. It was considered unbreakable. No one could crack the code. And every single day they would change the codes. If you knew what code to plug in, you'd be able to read the message, the hidden message. You could decipher it. But without that code, it was just simply gibberish. It was a riddle. It was an enigma. So you had 24 hours to crack the code. And if you didn't, the clock reset. You had to start over. And there's just billions and billions of possible combinations of words and phrases. And it was a struggle to get anywhere. And it had to be incredibly frustrating. Alan Turing was one of those musicians. He was brilliant. He lacked social skills. He's not a real good team player. He was arrogant beyond all belief, thought everyone around him was an idiot. And he went around his boss. Not generally good protocol, but he gets the funding to try and create a new machine that will help crack the Enigma machine. So everyone thinks he's nuts, but he sets out on his own to build this Enigma decoding machine. He finishes it, turns it on. If you watch the movie, the wheels start spinning. Lots and lots of wheels spinning, and they kind of symbolize this search that's searching for something, combinations of words or phrases that will help. And it just keeps spinning, searching, day in, day out. Hours go by, days go by. He's a little disheartened, and his superiors, who should be rooting for him, to some level, I think are almost rooting for him to fail because they can't stand him. And one night, Turing and his colleagues, they go to a military bar on base, and it's for his engagement party, and Turing's forced into introducing his colleague, Hugh, to a woman named Helen. They sit down and at the table, and Hugh starts flirting with this lady named Helen. And in the course of the conversation, Helen starts talking about her job, how her job is to listen every day to this German radio tower, same radio tower every single day. And she says, you kind of get to know these people. You kind of understand the way they type, who's typing. You kind of get this pattern emerging. And she says, it's kind of very, very intimate. She said, my colleagues joke with me, she said, that I'm dating my counterpart. But she says, clearly, my counterpart has a girlfriend. And with that, Hugh invites her up to the bar. So the two of them are talking, and Alan Turing is just sitting there. And all of a sudden, he, after a period of time, shouts, "Helen! Helen!" across the bar. No social skills. He says, "Helen, why do you think your German counterpart has a girlfriend? Why?" And she's a little startled by this, but she says every message has the same 5 letters at the very beginning. Silly, C-I-L-L-Y. So he said, I suspect Silly is the name of his girlfriend. And Turing's you can see the wheels spinning in his head. It doesn't make sense. The Germans are instructed to begin every message with 5 random letters. And then the light, you can see the light bulb going off. Love just lost the war. Love just lost the war. He runs back to his machine. All of his colleagues sprint after him. They don't understand what he's talking about. They get to his machine. And he says, what if we don't have to search every word in the dictionary? What if we just search for predictable words, words that we know are going to be there? And he said, every single message we've seen so far has a weather report at 6 a.m. So we plug in weather, and then the obvious one, I can't believe they forgot, is Heil Hitler. Heil Hitler. They plug those words in, the thing starts spinning, and then it stops. Turing writes down a bunch of random codes, goes back to the Enigma machine, plugs it in, and lo and behold, they can read this decoded message. People say that that's shortened the war because they were starting to be able to anticipate ahead of time. Long story, to get to a point, the word enigma appears once in the New Testament. It appears in 1 Corinthians 13. I'd never seen it before. It says when we look out at the world, we look at people, we can't always understand them. They're an enigma. An enigma is something hard to understand or explain at times, a complex riddle. And I would ask you today, people can certainly be an enigma, can't they? I mean, some of the politicians in our world are indeed an enigma. You wonder what's going on in their heads and in their hearts. Perhaps you have a coworker that's an enigma to you. Maybe someone in your life who you want to help, you just simply can't crack the code to help them. For St. Paul, the Corinthians were somewhat of an enigma to him. I mean, he had spent time with them. Corinth was a bustling city. Paul had sparked a vibrant community of faith there. He had taught them the way of Jesus. A bunch of house churches had started there, so small group gatherings who then gathered together for larger worship. But once Paul began to move on to other places and start other missions in other places, arrogance set in. There's this spirit of competitiveness began to emerge in Corinth. People started saying, my spiritual roots are better than your spiritual roots, or my gifts in this world are better than your gifts. There was immoral behavior. There was a sense of elitism emerged. Some were excluding other people. There was a lack of concern for the poor. There was a genuine sense of me-first attitude that Paul felt the need to address and address quickly. He hears of this. He hears of this deeply troubled community that to him no longer seemed very Jesus-like. Didn't seem very much like Jesus. They seemed to be confused about what it meant to follow him. And Paul looks at them and said, I don't get them. I don't get them. But instead of pointing the finger at them and putting them totally on the defensive, I think what he does is very, very strategic. He re-educates them, but he uses himself. He points to himself and kind of makes his own life a negative example. So in a nutshell, I think in some ways, if I came up, the first thing I said today is I'm useless, I suspect you would probably listen. You would probably listen for what I had to say next. And in some sense, that's what Paul's saying is I'm useless if I have a swelled head or a massive ego. I'm useless if I'm judgmental. I'm useless if I always look for the bad in other people. I'm useless if I add fuel to the injustice of the world. I'm useless if I keep track of the ways other people wrong me. I'm useless if all I worry about is myself, is what Paul is saying. He goes on to say, I could have the greatest gifts in the world. I could be the most charismatic person. I could be so special. But if I act as if the way I've just described, he would say, I'm useless. I don't know love. And truthfully, I'm not connected to Jesus, is what he's trying to describe to them. So they're listening. But Paul doesn't leave it there. He cracks the code for them again on what it means to follow Jesus. He points them to the path of discipleship. He points them to the God who continually is about demonstrating love. And he says, join in. Join in this type of expression. Biblical love, I say it at every wedding, is not emotion. Biblical love is a verb. It's an action. It's something that puts people on the move. It creates momentum in lives and in the world. When you're in New Orleans, Bands everywhere. You hear them everywhere. Bands everywhere start playing, "Oh, when the saints go marching in." "Oh, when the saints go marching in. Oh, Lord, I want to be in that number. When the saints go marching in." If I had the ability to play it, I would have played it, but you know the words. But it's contagious. Everyone starts singing and starts dancing. That's the way the love of God is when we share it. It's contagious. It inspires. People want to be a part of that when they truly experience. God's love and Christian love is not in any way an enigma. Paul clearly describes it to us and says, join in. And he says, this is what it's like. He says, love honors the inferior. Join in that dance. Love cares for the poor. Join in. Love builds up other people. Love protects the vulnerable. Join in. Love always asks, what's best for you? How can I help you? How can I serve you? Love sees value in all people, is what he says, not just your own small tribe on this planet. Love is demonstrating kindness. Love is ready to forgive and forgive again, Paul says. Join in. He says, join in, Corinthians. Join in, church throughout the world. Join in, individual Christian. Join in couples who are ready to begin their life together. We read this text, you've heard it over and over at any wedding you've gone to. But as I've said today, Paul wasn't talking simply about romantic love. He's speaking to every Christian follower saying, every day be a live demonstration of what the love of God looks like. There are plenty of witnesses out there of what love is not. And it's very easy to dwell on those witnesses who don't seem to grasp what love really is. But our calling at all times and in all places is to show the world what love really is, what love does. And as we do that, trust me, God is very, very near. And what Paul testifies is the love of God simply will never, ever be defeated. Amen.